All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to be having a conversation with you all about how people managers, HR leaders can best support themselves and their teams during this very stressful time. So just a small note before we get started, this content of this conversation is for educational purposes and should never be substituted for professional treatment or advice from healthcare providers. So please make sure to seek out that care if that's needed. I also want to just mention that we would love for this to be as conversational as possible. We know there's a lot of you joining in, so we'd love to tap into your questions and your expertise. So please feel free to use the chat, send in any questions that you have, any comments to either the panelists if you want us to address something, or to all the attendees if you want to start more of a conversation. And we have someone from Modern Health team, Haley, who will be moderating the chat, so she'll be sure to raise up all the different questions that are coming through. So without further ado, why don't we kick it off? My name is Dr. Myra Altman. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and VP of clinical care here at Modern Health. So I'm going to be sort of bringing the mental health perspective to this conversation. And I'll maybe hand it over to you, Amanda, to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Myra. Hi, everyone. My name is Amanda Felsen. I head up client success here at Modern Health and previously managed teams and initiatives at high growth technology organizations like Stripe, Airbnb, and Twitter. Sunil, over to you.
Thank you, Amanda. Hi, everyone. My name is Sunil. I lead coaching at Modern Health, and my responsibility is really coaching quality and coaching network. My background has been in tech leadership. I worked at Oracle and a lot of other enterprise companies, and really glad to be here today.
Wonderful. So thanks, everybody. Just to provide a little bit of context, obviously we know everyone is kind of dealing with a lot of stress and anxiety that's coming up related to the COVID pandemic. We wanted to really make sure that we were providing as much resources and support to HR professionals and people managers in particular. First, of course, we know that you're human as well, and so you're dealing with your own personal stress and anxiety with this situation, and really want to focus on how do you take care of yourselves. But then also these other different questions that might be coming up for you in particular around reduced productivity on your team or for yourself due to any illnesses or family obligations, potentially feelings of disconnection among your team, some reduction in morale with this coming up. Some businesses are seeing increased demand related to the situation at hand, and some are seeing less demand. So how to navigate some of those issues coming up for your company and your team. And then likely employees are coming to you more than ever with questions and concerns, confusion. So how to navigate that in what's quite an uncertain time. So this is sort of the context and what we'll be gearing our conversation around today. We obviously welcome you to share any and all questions that you have as we go through as well. We want to make this as relevant to what you're dealing with as you're supporting your teams. And I just want to also say a huge thank you to everything that you're doing. I think always this group of people is providing just an incredible benefit and service to their employees. But I think in a time like this in particular, really kind of on the front line and doing so much. So thank you as well. So we're going to break this up into 3 different sections. I'm going to kick us off talking a little bit about how to take care of yourself during this time. Really want to emphasize that first and foremost, making sure that you're prioritizing your own needs as well. Then we'll kick it over to the team to talk about how to maintain positivity and focus during this time, and then also connection and empathy, and how to use that as a real tool to bring your teams together during this stressful time. All right, so diving right in with caring for yourself and for your team. The first thing I really want to stress is in any situation like this, in any sort of stressful situation, we anticipate seeing an increase in distress, in mental health symptoms. So it's really important for both yourself and your team to notice what that looks like for you, to pay attention to the signs and symptoms that you might be experiencing that might be an indicator that you need a little bit of extra support or a break or something a little bit different, or potentially that people on your team or at your company might be struggling and might need a little bit of extra support. So we tend to think of these in 4 different categories. There might be some emotional responses: anxiety, stress, fear, feeling empty, feeling withdrawn. All of these are common to come up in the course of a really stressful situation like this. Totally understandable if you're feeling this way. I think a lot of people are feeling this way. So just want to make sure that's kind of said at the outset is that's a normal response and something that we would anticipate. And we also expect that that will get better over time. And we'll talk about some strategies to help that happen as well. Next is noticing potentially some behavioral changes. So you might notice that you're either keeping excessively busy or isolating. It's a little bit hard to judge when we're all probably under social distancing and shelter in place type guidelines. But noticing if your behaviors have changed significantly in response to your emotions, to anxiety, to stress, whether that's keeping overly busy or not busy enough, starting to use substances in maybe a way that's unhealthy, just checking in with yourself on what's changed since this all started, and is that helping or not. Want to spend a fair amount of time on the thoughts section. Thoughts are central to our well-being. And totally understand at this time if there's difficulty concentrating, following instructions, memory problems. We're probably all juggling hundreds of different things. So just knowing that that's, again, something that's going to come up, and as much as possible, if you can treat yourself with some kindness, acknowledge that we're all going through a very difficult time and these things are understandable. We're not going to all be functioning at 100% all the time in the best of circumstances, let alone when there's a lot of stress happening. So seeing if you can just acknowledge if that's coming up for yourself or potentially for folks on your team. And then we would also anticipate some physical changes in response to stress. So things like tiredness, headaches, tension, pain, difficulty breathing, etc. Really, really important to pay attention to the physical symptoms because those can be a really good indicator that stress is becoming overwhelming or that you're really feeling distressed. And it's a good suggestion that if you're starting to see these symptoms coming up, that maybe it's time to focus a little bit more on self-care or to reach out for a little bit of extra support. And I think what's super important across all of these different areas is noticing what's typical for you. Everybody has different signs and symptoms of stress or distress. So for example, I know if I have a headache, that's probably a sign for me, whereas for someone else, it might be feeling tired, might be feeling shaky, it might be keeping excessively busy. So starting to notice for yourself, and the most important thing we're looking for is when there's a change. If something has markedly changed from pre-COVID to post-COVID, and then similarly for your team members, if you're starting to notice any changes that they're exhibiting, whether that's not being as productive as normal, difficulty concentrating, isolating, and just checking in with them. And Sunil and Amanda will have some phenomenal suggestions there as well. Let me pause here for just a second and see if anyone has any questions or reactions to anything coming up here.
And feel free to enter them in the chat feature.
Thanks, Haley. All righty. So one thing I also want to stress is we can talk a lot about different self-care strategies that can be hard to maintain in the best of times. So I wanted to just become really, really practical here with, given everyone is under a lot of stress, what are some really tangible and practical strategies you can take away just to have some little mental health breaks during the day, even if it's just for a couple of seconds. So if you notice any of the signs or symptoms from the first page, that's a great time to practice one of these techniques, or just sprinkle it throughout your day regardless. We're definitely big fans over here of prevention first. So what I wanted to really stress, there's always enough time in the day to take a mental health break, right? We might not have an hour, we might not have 2 hours, but we all have 10 seconds. And that can be hugely impactful and make a big difference between your day becoming really overwhelming and your ability to get through the day. So if you only have 10 or 30 seconds to spare, just taking some really deep breaths. What's important here is making sure your exhale is longer than your inhale. What that does is it tells your body it can relax. It can go out of fight or flight mode and really just calm down and get back to baseline. So I'll actually have us all practice this for, again, just 10 seconds. You can shut your eyes or you can keep them open. And just breathe in really deeply to your belly, inhaling for a count of 4, 3, 2, 1, and exhaling for a count of 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhaling for a count of 4, And exhaling for a count of 6. Inhaling for a count of 4. And exhaling for a count of 6. And so hopefully you've noticed you can bring your awareness back to the room, or if you'd prefer, you can just keep deep breathing for the rest of this session. No one has to know. But hopefully you notice that just in 30 seconds, you can really slow things down and start to feel a little bit more relaxed, and that'll enable you to go about your day a little bit more effectively. If you have a little bit longer than 30 seconds, if you have 1 minute, you can practice some mindfulness, just paying attention to the physical sensations of being in the present moment. So you can focus on your breathing, you can focus on the feeling in your feet, feeling in your hands, you can focus on the taste of the water in your mouth, whatever it might be that just really grounds you to your 5 senses, to what's happening in the present moment. If you have closer to 5 minutes, taking a walk, focusing on your breathing. If you're able to get outside into some fresh air, that can make all the difference in the world. And then if you have a little bit longer, if you have 30 minutes, if you have an hour, which hopefully we can all make time for, even in this stressful time, spending some time to meet with a coach or a therapist, if you have that available, even just calling a friend on the phone, talking about something that's not work, that's not coronavirus, taking a nap, watching a silly TV show, whatever you need to do to kind of give yourself a little bit of self-care time in the day to really focus on what your own needs are. Awesome. The other thing that I really want to talk about here as well is boundaries. I think everyone in this room with us today are people. We like to be helpful. We like to take care of others. That's why we all ended up in the roles that we end up in. And so again, we really appreciate everything that you're doing to help others, but also want to make sure you're prioritizing taking time for yourself. We can be most effective at helping others when we're also taking care of ourselves. So one thing that I found to be very helpful there is when you have taken time off, actually taking time off, whether that means putting your phone away for a while, being offline, just really disconnecting and not being available for others, letting them know ahead of time, of course. And then also being okay with saying no. You're already doing a ton. There might be things that you're just not able to do. And how can you say no to those respectfully, get additional support, ask for help for people who are in the helping profession. Sometimes it's hard for us to ask others to help us, but I think this is a time when I've been very heartened to see everyone being really willing to support their communities and support each other. So ask for help, say no, you're doing a ton. So make sure you're taking care of yourself here. Okay, so one big takeaway, make sure you're prioritizing time for yourself. I know also top of mind for everyone is how to support their teams during this time as well. So here's just a few different tips and tricks and techniques that we found to be really, really helpful. The first is building psychological safety. We want our teams to know that it's okay to be feeling stressed, it's understandable, and that they can come to you with these types of concerns. And one of the best ways to do that is through modeling, through being vulnerable and showing and sharing what you're going through. In a time like this, it might be saying, I'm feeling overwhelmed or stressed with this situation, or I'm finding work from home difficult. This is what I'm doing to cope. It just really opens the door and it tells people that it's okay to talk about these things. It's okay to let people know what's going on, which can be hugely relieving. If you're both feeling really stressed and trying to hide all of that stress, kind of double duty that everyone's having to do. Being direct and describing what you see. So these conversations are difficult to have, but leading with what's objective and observable, right? So if you notice that a very talkative team member is more quiet, just asking them, letting them know what you've noticed, not judgmentally, but notice you've been more quiet. Is everything okay? Or I notice that you've been seeming stressed because of X, Y, Z. Is everything okay? The next one is really important too, of listening and reflecting. Oftentimes we want to jump to problem solving and we want to jump to being helpful, but sometimes people just need to feel heard. So when you hear from someone, just reflecting back what you're hearing. It sounds like you've been struggling with working from home. Am I getting that right? Am I understanding that correctly? What's been going on for you? really helps to open up that conversation. When in doubt, validate emotions. Whatever anyone's feeling is totally understandable, and given what they're going through. Sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed. That makes sense. How can I be helpful? By keeping it to the level of emotions, you can really, one, help people feel supported, and two, open up the conversation in a way that you might not otherwise, and really get a sense of what's going on with someone. We also want to just, if we're expressing concern, if we're worried about something, be gentle in how we're doing it. Not assuming anything, not implying anything, but just saying, I know that this has been stressful. Are you taking time to take care of yourself? People might not always be ready to talk, and that's totally okay. And sometimes just knowing you're available is enough. So planting that seed, I'm here if you want to talk about the situation. I'm here if you want to talk about how you're managing work with taking care of kids at home, etc. Letting people know that your virtual door is always open. And then, of course, guiding to professional resources. We're not people's therapists. Even though I am a therapist, the people I work with, I'm not their therapist, right? So making sure that we're referring to those types of resources as needed. So if you have Modern Health, that's a great resource to guide people to, or if you have an EAP or other benefits available through your company, letting people know about those in these times can be really, really helpful, and just supporting them in getting access to that type of care.
Myra, we've got a question for you before we move
Yeah.
on. Someone wrote in that they're struggling with their partner who is experiencing a lot of anxiety during this time, and they're not super excited about getting any support. And so this person is wondering how they can point them to resources or additional support that they can suggest. They feel like they're running out of ideas.
Yeah, thank you so much for raising that question. So I think the first thing to remember is always that we can't change somebody else. It's really, behavior change is really hard for ourselves, let alone for anyone else. So you're not responsible for someone else changing their behavior. You can do the best you can and you can offer support, but ultimately it's up to them whether they take that advice, whether they take those suggestions. So kind of using that as a framework for what you're able to do. I think using some of these techniques, so, and I'm seeing some specifics of the question as well, letting them know that you're noticing that they're struggling. I've noticed that you seem really worried about the coronavirus situation. You've been taking your temperature very frequently. You've been washing your hands many times a day. I'm concerned that you're feeling really anxious about this situation. Is that right? Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Opening up that conversation to see if you're accurately getting a sense of what they're going through. Ideally, that opens up the conversation where then you can lead to some more supports. The other thing that can be really helpful is talking about the impact on you, right? So you're describing what you're seeing. You seem really stressed out and overwhelmed. That makes me feel very scared for your health or worried about you. I would really appreciate it if you got some additional support so that you could be healthier and I could be less worried. Like, why is it important that they take those resources and get that care? I think what's really interesting is obviously we're seeing a lot of increased anxiety and stress as a society now, and so it's kind of sometimes hard to know what's excessive or what's impairing us versus what's kind of normal given what's happening. And really taking a note of, is this impairing somebody's ability to function? Is it becoming overwhelming? And that's really a guide for when professional resources from a therapist, from a coach, depending on the topic, can be really, really helpful. So really appreciate that question. If we didn't fully answer it, let us know, or if you have follow-up questions, feel free to reach out afterwards as well. All right.
Great.
Thank you so much, and I'll hand it over.
Thank you, Myra. So I'm going to be building on a lot of the great recommendations that Myra led off with, but from the perspective of maybe some examples of how you can both connect and empathize with your team. And I think connecting and empathizing tends to come very naturally and intuitively to a lot of people leaders and HR leaders, but particularly during times of uncertainty and feelings of disconnection, I think it can be really important to double down on some of the strategies and tactics that maybe come naturally to us when we're in an office, but can sometimes be more challenging when we're working remotely. So starting with the idea of connection. Great. So I think we've all heard and read a lot over the past few weeks about how important it is to ensure that we use technology to ensure business continuity, having meetings via video conferencing solutions, making sure that you're connecting with folks regularly on work-related items via messaging tools like Slack or Teams. But one of the things that I love is this idea of tech-assisted micro-connections. And what I mean by that is connecting over some of the non-critical but smaller aspects of your day. So what that could look like in practice are maybe you're sharing smaller updates via messaging tools like Slack and Teams. Our team, for example, posts our top 2 priorities for the day in our Slack channel. And we also call out any blockers, so anything that might stand in our way of completing our most important tasks. This can be a really great way to drive team-wide visibility into the projects that are moving forward and can often spark really valuable team conversation that otherwise we might be having amongst each other in an office environment or over a table. I think too that as a manager or a team leader, having visibility into the blockers, so what is preventing employees from moving projects forward on a day-to-day basis, can potentially identify ways that you might be able to support their team with just driving momentum. The second piece that I'll say though on this is it's also important to use technology to build personal connections. So that could mean hosting a team lunch or a happy hour over video, or setting up other forums for people to stay connected over hobbies and personal passions. Our team actually hosted a virtual lunch earlier this week when we talked mostly about reality television. And I think that that was a welcome respite from the workday. Similarly, Modern Health hosts a book club once a month and will be conducting the next instance over Zoom. And I see forums like that as really great opportunities for us to build morale as a team outside of the day-to-day of our work-related action items. I would also suggest maybe considering hosting office hours by having a video conference room open while you work, or maybe even scheduling time as a team to just be. This can help individuals feel like they have an accessible forum to say hello or ask questions, and gives people the opportunity to casually interact as they would during the office. So I'm going to brand this tech-assisted micro connections, but that's hopefully some more context into what that might look like in practice. I think an important part, though, of ensuring that you're connecting is being flexible. Connecting effectively during a time when a lot of things are uncertain and irregular naturally requires some flexibility. Some of your team members, particularly those who are parents or caregivers, might require a drastically modified work schedule due to their family obligations. Others may find that they're just personally more productive and able to work more effectively at non-standard business hours. And I think realistically, your ability to accommodate those types of challenges may vary by industry, company, or team. But to the extent that you can, helping an employee manage a schedule that works for them can go a long way towards fostering connection as a team. In practice, I think being flexible could look like making time for shorter and more frequent one-on-ones if people are struggling to manage their schedules, maybe shifting team meetings to accommodate those different schedules, or supporting employees who maybe just would benefit from making time during quote unquote normal working hours to connect with loved ones or attend to personal needs. The last thing I'll say on flexibility is my personal experience this week is that internet has not been super reliable for me. I think there is a large number of people right now working from home, working remotely. And sometimes joining video conferences from my computer just doesn't work. So being flexible on the medium as well, realizing that you might have to pick up the phone and just call somebody's cell phone to have a one-on-one or have a conversation, that's important to remember as well. Lastly on this, I'll say, I think it's important to share and encourage your teams to share positive experiences. And more than that, realize that as a manager, there may be people on your team for whom their interaction with you is one of only a small handful of interactions they have the opportunity to connect each day. So building rapport outside of just work tasks can be a really valuable way to support those individuals. And those positive experiences can be work-related, let's say a positive conversation with a client or a colleague, or they can be non-work related. You could share a home anecdote or something related to a personal hobby. So I personally have been sharing with my team the various shows I've been streaming for entertainment, the books I've been reading, and the meals that I've been cooking now that I actually have time to prepare them. And that's been a really nice reminder of the things that I can be grateful for in spite of all of the challenges that we're navigating. And I also think, last point on this, I think it's important to call out that extended non-work discussion can feel uncomfortable or unusual if it wasn't already a part of your team culture. And so building that during a time when everyone is remote can sometimes feel awkward. But I'd say in those cases, as a leader, being the first to volunteer your personal experiences can go a long way towards building that connection. And I would reiterate, you may need to do that a few times before your team truly feels comfortable opening up. So that's it for connection. Next, we will move on to demonstrating empathy. I think during times of challenge and uncertainty, it's even more important for managers to lead with support. So similar to the way that you might navigate sharing positive experiences, if you as a leader are comfortable being vulnerable with your employees, it'll help create a safe space for them to also share anything that they're struggling with. Some examples of how I like to do this with my team. You could do this by talking about the challenges you're personally navigating. I've had to limit my exposure to the news because I find it overwhelming at times. And that's something that I've shared with my team and the people around me so that I don't get blasted by news articles multiple times a day. Similarly, I will say that if you have the opportunity, or if you are lucky enough to get the opportunity to meet with a coach or therapist regularly and feel comfortable sharing that with your team, consider making that appointment visible on your calendar and letting your team know that you'll be unavailable during that period of time as you attend to your own mental health. I think actions like that can help demonstrate that it is expected and encouraged to seek out additional support and to prioritize making time to tend to your own emotional well-being. Secondly, acknowledging challenges rather than rushing to find a solution. I think Myra framed this really beautifully when she talked about self-care and sort of fielded the question as well. But I think reinforcing that feelings of anxiety and overwhelm are absolutely to be expected. Not feeling pressured to find a solution, but just feeling comfortable acknowledging those feelings and holding space for them. But at the same time, asking the employee or peer, if it's someone who's approaching you, if there's anything that they think you can do to make things easier for them. And then lastly, I would say, recognize that productivity is a challenge. I think we've seen a lot of really wonderful content on the internet over the past few weeks on how to hack or optimize productivity while you're working from home. But I think the reality is still that working from home and dealing with disconnection and reduced morale and anxiety is really, really hard. And I think it can be important to let employees know that it's okay to feel like some days are difficult, and it's okay to feel like some days you really didn't feel that productive. I think the more that you as a leader can position yourself as someone who can help and not somebody whom they're afraid to talk to about some of their productivity challenges, can go a long way towards building that morale, fostering that sense of connection and empathy. And what that could look like in practice is saying something like, I had a day last week when I felt incredibly overwhelmed and just stared at my computer screen for 2 hours, which is true of me on one of the days that I had to navigate last week. Similarly, you could share an instance where caregiving or attending to children has meant that you've drastically had to shift your priorities or your expectations of what you're able to get accomplished in a day. I think similarly, the more that you can volunteer those experiences, the more comfortable other folks will be in sort of similarly sharing their challenges. I think the last note that I'll make on this is that assuming that all employees will be at full productivity is likely unrealistic. And so I think the more that you can have an open dialogue around that, the better equipped you are to be able to support them and, where appropriate, potentially help those individuals who are struggling.
Amanda, we've got a great question for you. Someone wrote in that their company works remotely typically. So even though leadership has said that they should take care of themselves during this time, there's a sense of business as usual. So this person's encouraged their reports to take time off and be gentle on themselves, and told them how they're doing it, but still see them being anxious and trying to keep working as usual. And so wondering if you have any advice on this particular situation.
Yeah, this is a great question and something that I can obviously understand and relate to. I would say, firstly, identifying tasks that are critical versus non-critical, particularly if workload has increased as a result of the current situation, and proactively having that conversation with individuals and identifying what needs to get done over what periods of times and what blocks of time you can create in your day to sort of individuals can create in their day to create space for themselves. I would say too, similarly, talking to an individual about their energy levels and what times of day and what times of the week they feel productive versus when they don't. I'll share a personal example. I wake up very early in the morning. I am generally most productive before noon. After 6 p.m., I'm utterly unproductive. That is something that I communicate to my team. There are individuals on my team whose energy levels look very, very different to mine. And we just understand that different people work effectively at different times during the day. And to the extent possible, I try to create space for them to manage their productivity in a way that feels right and feels appropriate to them. Lastly, I would just say to you, I think being able to communicate upwards to management around what your team is doing and explicitly not doing can help with some of that as well. And sharing with your team that that's what you're doing ensures that all expectations are aligned. And I actually know that that's something that Sunil is going to talk a little bit about in his section as well.
Yeah, I completely echo everything Amanda said. And if I could add as well, like, I love that you're already sharing how you're doing this. You can also start to like amplify what your teammates and your reports are doing. So if someone said no to something or said they couldn't be in a meeting at that time because they're going on a walk, like celebrate those things so that you really show that it's okay. It's not just saying business as usual. Or even if it's scheduling a team time, like Amanda was suggesting, to do something totally different. Like, you're not allowed to do work between 4 and 5, you know, we're all going on a walk and chatting or whatever it might be. Really, really showing that it's actually okay to be doing things that are different and taking time out.
And if I can add one more thing to it, it's also important to acknowledge and celebrate the small wins that the team might have, because at times when teams are remote and it's business as usual on one side, I think amplifying also the small wins just keeps everyone on the page. There's a lot happening, although from a holistic perspective, it may not seem like things are being productive, right? And you'll be surprised that actually so much gets done anyway. So I think that's also an important component of keeping things going. With any other questions, Haley, or should I move on?
I think we're good to move on.
All right. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Myra. So having heard from Amanda and Myra on care for your team and for yourself, and also ways to connect and empathize, I want to spend a few minutes just talking about some operational nuances that you got to keep in mind. And I like to bucket them under two different components. One is called positivity and the other is called focus. So let's kind of look at what that really means. So the first part is showing the path forward. So teams are always looking for clarity from you as a leader and direction. And I think it's even more so now than ever. So as your role is going to be kind of giving them, direction, so that as part of their overall well-being, this becomes an important component, right? So what are some of the ways that you can actually do that? To begin with, you can make the discussions more action-oriented. So the team is going to come to you with a lot of issues that surrounding, a lot of news that comes in with everything changing on a regular basis. To begin with, you got to empathize with them, but also kind of help them think about what can they do going forward? What are the small progress that they can make against this uncertainty? For example, someone could come to you and say that, okay, I just heard that schools are going to be shut down for the next 1 month. I don't know how that's going to affect. So empathize with that, but also then move the discussion to, okay, how does that change things and how can I help you? And how do we kind of make things better for you in some form? So always make them very action oriented. Questions like, what can we do about it? What progress can we make? And what has not really changed are some questions which actually help orient the discussion in that way. The other thing also is, the reason for moving discussions forward is you may not have the luxury of regrouping in a very informal setting to actually rehash things as you would in a normal situation. So really using the time you have when you're connecting with your team to actually make things action oriented and having a definite action that everyone can take together is especially important. The second part is going to be around making your decisions very factual. So change is hard for everyone. So as you know, me as a coaching lead here, Amanda and Myra, we're going through changes ourselves, and it's hard. We feel it. Your team also feels it, and hence there'll be some amount of resistance to change, which is very natural. But I think it's important for you as a leader to look at that and see what are the facts that's available and how do we make those decisions which are very fact based. And you have to also communicate it to your team. So you would find that things change, but not everything changes. For example, if the team comes together and you decide and say that this whole release that's coming out has to be now delayed because of many different reasons, you may actually have a discussion and say that do we really need to delay the entire release, or can we just delay parts of it? What are the facts that's available that can actually make a decision on this, right? Or for example, if a team says that having a lot of these meetings in a remote setting is not really productive, I think you as a team leader needs to bring the facts to the table and let the team decide based on facts, is that the real problem or can we modify it to make it even better? So make sure your decisions are really very factual. And another important part here is also to watch your own biases, which may lead you to micromanage in some cases, because managing a remote team distributed sometimes is very tough. So you should check your own biases and check, are you averse to remote working, right? Do you really believe that the team cannot be functioning in a remote way? And ask yourself that question, and then make sure that the data supports those biases, right? So make sure decisions are not based on biases. The third part is reiterating the North Star. So I think as a leader, we all know that that's our role to actually make sure we help the team focus in the direction that everyone needs to be moving towards. But in times like these, it's even more important to do that because there is a fair share of news that is all around us, which captures everyone's attention. And it is important for you as a leader to make sure that the team does not forget about what's the larger North Star we're working towards and why are we working towards it, right? So it's upon you to kind of reiterate that. And remember that your team, unlike normal times, will not be able to catch hallway conversations or water cooler conversations, right? So those channels are all shut down now. So you have to replace it with more timely posts, maybe on a Slack channel or Microsoft Teams, or you're sending some kind of weekly digest, or make it part of every team meeting where you're reiterating the North Star. So everyone, when they start their day, when they start their week, they're always aware, what are we working towards? And even though everything that's changing, these are things that we need to focus on. Before I move on to the next part, were there any questions that anyone had I would answer?
We have a question around productivity that I think would be great for you, Sunil.
Sure.
Someone said their team is unable to remain productive because of family distractions during this time.
Yeah.
And wondering how they can help them.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, and very practical. And I'm experiencing it myself. So I would say that it's important for us to realize that things are not going to be the same, as Amanda mentioned earlier. Given that, I think it's also important as team leaders to make sure that we are setting up the right structures for the teams to operate. So for example, you could help them say that, okay, why don't you have like blocked off time, maybe 30 minutes or 45 minutes in a day, that or during the days where you're actually just focused on work. And then it's well understood that you may take time off to help with your family stuff. So helping them with those structures and then having communication with them over Slack or in the channel to make sure that you're there to support them will actually help them feel that they're making progress throughout the day, even though at any point of time they may not feel very productive, right? So it is really, going back to my point of celebrating small wins, I think that helps a long way in helping the team feeling productive overall. Okay, so we can move on to the next part of really looking at some of the operational details, and that is you need to sweat the details. Now, we are often told as people managers, you don't need to sweat the details and let the team kind of, run the show, and then you can help unblock them. That does not really change. But however, in this situation where you're managing remote teams and then teams are in environments which are very different for them, it is very important as a team leader to help them figure out or help them know what are the details which will help them from an operational perspective to be productive. Right? The challenges due to ambiguity are more pronounced, so you have to double down on the details than you would normally. So what are some examples that you could do? One is you can create what is called a source of truth documents. GitLab, a company of about more than 1,000 employees, are completely distributed. has conceived this whole term called source of truth documents. The idea is that everything that needs to be known about something is in documents, and everyone refers to documents when they want to take an action on it, right? So documents like these helps keep everyone in the loop. Nothing is tribal knowledge within the team in some form. It also avoids a lot of bottlenecks and operational heartaches down the line. And one of the tricks that you can use is actually, if there is something new that needs to be communicated, you document it first and then you communicate. So everyone knows that the reference or the source of truth they need to go to are documents, and not necessarily having to ping employees to figure out what's happening. You could use Notion, you could use Google Docs, you could use Confluence, any tool that's available to you already as a company. Make sure you are doubling down on the usage of these tools to have a central source of truth. And guess what? When everything and all this is over, which it will very soon, I mean, you go back to the normal working styles, these documents will reside with you and be great tools for you even going forward. The second part about spreading the details is around one-on-ones and team meetings. Amanda touched upon it a little bit as to why that's important for Connect. I think it's not optional anymore, because connecting with your team and having these rituals are very important. But this is a time when you get your entire team together. You're bringing everyone together on the same page. You're giving them airtime to talk about things that they want to talk about. And it also helps clarify any operational ambiguities. For example, you could have a team meeting and one part of it is just around what is someone not clear about that we can help address, right? So just spending those 5 minutes in that meeting can help avoid maybe like 5 hours of problems down the line. And then make sure these meetings have clear agenda and make it really meaningful, right? So your one-on-ones have to be very meaningful about how are things going with you. Is are you able to be productive? Are you feeling safe? Are you at a happy place? And then what else can we do about, what else can I do as a leader to help you where you are? The last part is around communicating rules of engagement. Now, Amanda talked about using technology as different ways of connect. And we do have multiple technologies that we all use. It could be Slack, you could be using Zoom, you could be using phone calls, emails. The idea is that we have to have rules of engagement on what technology really applies well, in what direction. For example, you could say that anything that's a design discussion can go on Slack as a thread, but something that's more urgent, let's get on a call and hash it out. You have to have cadence, you have to have notions of asynchronous versus synchronous communication, which ones lean well towards each, and make sure that's communicated across the entire team so that you don't have somebody slacking messages or sending something on Microsoft Teams while ideally the rest of the team really wants to get on a call and hash it out, right? So make sure you're setting expectations also around what are the modified work schedules, right? And I think as Amanda and Myra mentioned, things are going to be different and productivity is going to look different, but you have to really set expectations across the entire team. What are the modified schedules and what are the times when we all agree to be together, and empathize with the fact that we have to take time off to take care of family situation or something else. But having that communicated and having rules of engagement around this with the entire team is super, super useful. And finally, make sure these things are non-negotiable, right? So you have to have this in place and then everyone agrees to it and then you move forward with it. So these are some ways and you can actually make sure that from an operational perspective as a team leader, you can help make sure some of the ground level issues are handled well. Back to you, Haley. If there are any questions, channel.
We have another great question for you and maybe for Amanda as well on setting realistic expectations. So I know you mentioned, setting expectations around working hours, but someone's curious how they set productivity expectations, balancing the idea that there's, a lot of reasons that people may have less productivity, but the idea also that work still needs to be done.
Yeah, I can go first. I think it's important to have a good discussion about what will the month look like, and what will the quarter look like, what will the month look like, and hence what will a week look like, right? I think it's very important to have the top-down discussion because productivity is always relative to what are the end goals that we are working towards. So given the new situation everyone has, I think you can set the right expectations that this is something we want to absolutely get done by end of the month. These are some things that are great to have given the new situation. And then discussions have to be around for us to kind of get to what we absolutely need to get to. Are we at a point where there isn't enough productivity and what can we do about it? So what that helps with is that you're having discussions which are in context with the times right now, and not having productivity discussions in a normal situation context, right? So that will, so I think my big take is you should have a top-down discussion and set the right expectation from there, and then take it forward. Amanda, do you want to add anything to that?
I would absolutely agree with everything Sunil said. And one thing that I found personally helpful is, particularly when it comes to really large projects, breaking them down into small milestones and setting yourself micro deadlines for each of those milestones. It can help avoiding the feeling that large projects are incredibly overwhelming. And coupled with that, I would say if you are building a culture where team members are posting sort of their top 1 to 2 priorities for a day, or you're posting them, it can also be helpful to understand, like, if people are posting the same priorities over and over again, that can potentially be a flag that maybe somebody is struggling to make headway on a big initiative or project, either because of productivity or because of other things. I think it can be a really tricky balance with that, because you don't want to wade into the territory of micromanaging your team while they're working remotely. But I think if you're able to manage that expectation and have that visibility, while encouraging people to feel like it's okay if they're struggling with productivity and you're here to support them with those challenges, that can be an effective way to navigate the balance of the two.
And a great follow-up question that just came through. What do I do if I'm the one who feels unproductive or needs to change schedules based on caregiving or something else, and am not as available to my team?
That's a great question. I'm happy to start with this one. This is something that I've struggled with, mostly on the productivity side. I think just being transparent about where you are, and asking team members to make changes to support you as well, if that's something that you need. So I'll give an example. I had a day earlier this week when I just felt that I was very unproductive, and as a result wasn't able to get something done that I had promised to a team member. I had a very candid conversation with that team member about not being able to get that thing to them. We realigned expectations, and I was able to sort of block time off in my calendar and actually move my calendar around a little bit to set some of the time that I needed to do that. I think that if you're somebody who is sort of caregiving and managing an unusual schedule, reflecting on your calendar, so whether it's a Google Calendar or an Outlook calendar, blocks of time when you unfortunately cannot make yourself available, whether it's because you need to take care of children, or you're working in a studio apartment and you have a partner working with you. I think the more visibility you can give into your availability and manage expectations around it, the more others will understand how they can effectively work with you, how they can support with you, and also understand that they can do the same thing when it comes to managing their own schedules and mental health.
Yeah, and I'll add a couple of things to that. One is also for us to kind of talk about productivity in the right sense, right? We have to reframe what productivity is. So especially if you're doing work and you have, you have to spend time with caregiving, productivity is all about, doing both together, right? So it's actually pretty tough on everyone, right? So I would almost reframe productivity and say, is it really about productivity, or is it that amount of time I have to really do work-related stuff is reduced compared to other things that I'm expected to do? So to begin, I think once you do that, you start empathizing with the fact that you're working hard, right? You're doing the best you can, and I think that itself will help make sure that you're motivated to move forward. That's number one. And then after you have ways to kind of manage the work time to make sure you're chunking it and doing the way that you can do best, you should also model the right behavior for your team and basically say, I have the same situation, and I think modeling the behavior and communicating with the team, and as Amanda mentioned, being transparent will also help a long way. So that would be just a couple of things I would add to that.
And I'll add as well, I think there's sort of a shared humanity that everyone's experiencing now. Like, I've had lots of calls with both internal team members, partners, as well as external, where someone might have their kid on their lap during a meeting. Some of them have actually had phenomenal ideas. I want them in meetings more, but that's, I think, because things are so different, there's, I think, a little bit more shared understanding of that. So as much as you can reflect that flexibility to team members of what's different now that might not have been okay a month ago or 2 weeks ago, but that's okay now, kind of establishing some of those team norms as well.
I think we have time for one last question before we'll wrap up. And so one that's kind of related to what we were just talking about is someone's finding that they're having trouble remaining positive during this time. And they feel like they're trying to model that positivity, but are struggling to do so. And so how do you keep positive for your team if you aren't very, very positive yourself?
So,
go ahead, Sunil.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the great tips that Mara gave right at the beginning is really about self-care, right? So I think it's important for you to kind of start with that and make sure you are a place you feel at a place where you feel good, and hence you can then help your team. Positivity is all about making sure that with everything that's happening, you're able to kind of look forward, right? So once you are able to do a small mindfulness exercise, for example, or even deep breathing, it'll help you at a place where kind of you can look positively forward, essentially. And I would also say that it is okay not to feel positive all the time. I think accepting that is totally fine. I think your team does not expect you to be a superpower of any kind at this point of time. I think just empathizing with that itself is important. And I would say, I think begin with that. And I know Amanda, you want to add something to that?
I agree 100%, Sunil. I think rather than attempting to force yourself to be positive about things that don't necessarily feel that positive, maybe there are only 2 or 3 very small things that you feel positive about right now, and maybe only 2 of those 3 things are related to work. I think it's fine to just share those. I think that as leaders, we can often feel under pressure to sort of be that positivity and stability. But I think that the reality of the situation that we're in right now is that what positivity looks like and what support and leadership looks like is maybe a little bit different to what it looked like, say, 2 months ago. So I would focus on identifying the things that you feel positive about and feel comfortable sharing, and focusing on those things rather than trying to make yourself feel positive about things that are challenging to feel positive or excited about.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And I think reframing from positivity to realistic and fact-based, I think people sense when we're being dishonest about something. So if we're saying everything is great, nothing's changed, no one's going to believe that, right? So how do you acknowledge the reality of the situation? This is really tough, and not add to it and catastrophize. I think that's one thing to add. If you're kind of making things more negative by saying this is never going to get better, this is going to be a disaster, try to sort of notice those types of thoughts or expressions, but stick to the facts. Like, this is really hard, and I'm confident we can work through it together. Whatever you can say that you really believe in. And then I would definitely echo what Amanda said. What are the things you can be positive about? And I think there's been countless examples of those, with people doing kind deeds to each other. Sunil sent me a picture the other day of a rainbow that came out. Things like that, where there are small things and there's gratitudes we can have, even if it's not positivity about the situation or what you're going through. What are those small things you can point to? So I will just echo what they said. And thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate the questions and the interaction. I'll also note that we'll be doing a lot more of these series. So if there are questions that you have, that your team members have, that you think would be helpful for us to address, or to get other folks in to address for future conversations, please do let us know. We really want to be a resource to all of you. And then you'll also get a little bit of a survey after this closes. So please send us feedback. You'll get an email as well. So reach out with any other questions. But thank you so much again for taking the time to join us. Thanks for everything that you're doing for your teams. And please use us as a resource. So have a lovely rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.